Hello, David McMillan here with something from my past that might be a little useful today. When I was in my early 20s, I smuggled narcotics from Asia. The operation became complex. I had 30 passports, and the couriers, well, they had at least 4 each. They did well. They became rich. But not all of them were quite happy enough or rich enough in their lives. One of them, after she was retired, felt that I should retire too. So to bring that about, she contacted the police and told them everything she knew. Well, the retired courier's plan to have me retired worked well. I was arrested, imprisoned, of course. By the way, everything was taken. People were killed, including those very close to me. My life was a wreck. So 10 years later, when I was released and I went back to work, I decided I should think more closely about the forces lined up against me and who they were, what kind of people, and the way they thought. And that's got some bearing on where we are today. As though I hadn't given any thought at all to what the police might be like, I suppose I was a bit light-hearted about it. I used to play with one, in a sense. My house phone was being bugged, and at about 1 o'clock in the morning, I used to pick up the old-fashioned receiver in my hand, dial 1 to get rid of the dial tone, and have a chat to whoever was on night duty. I figured it'd be some very low-ranking policeman there, and I used to ask him, though he never answered, I'd talk into the microphone, why do you suppose you got this job, on the night shift, listening to any calls I might make? Why you? When probably, from what I can tell, you're the best in the force. You're the one with the ideas. But people with less than you, they just seem to get ahead. And I do this night after night. You know, I'm sure I sometimes imagined I was hearing a voice down the other end. I might have been wrong and there was nothing to it. Mind you, about a week later, somebody turned up at the house pretending to be a gas repairman, even though I'd reported no fault. He said, as he poked around on my stove, you know, everybody's got their job to do. It's not right that somebody should run somebody down just because they're doing their job. Don't you think? Well, I guess I had my sympathies. And I'm sure he wasn't a gas repairman. It was the shoes that gave it away. Look for that. Somebody can be wearing the right kind of a boiler suit or the right jacket. But if the shoes don't match, check it out again. There were other police who had taken the 2-year investigation and all the wasted money spent pretty hard too. I think there was a Sergeant Bach who supposedly shot himself. There were some troubles with it, but really that would have been personal, wouldn't it? And quite a lot of the police officers, after the 6-month trial, it was a very close call thing, they retired early with stress. But again, I think that was just something different at play, opportunity for early retirement. But who were my, well, I say enemy, but they were really just the opposition. And the reason I'm breaking these officials down is because I want to know just what they're about. I thought more about these officials as I saw them and how their minds think. And above them, of course, there were superintendents, there were elected officials, there were presidents and prime ministers. And were they just human too? Were they superior? Did they have superior skills? Well, none of us really think so. Just look at 2 of them, and it's alarming, don't you think? Especially now, when they do have something to do.
The impossibilia, the adjunta, it is not going to happen, it is more likely that, as I say, I will be reincarnated as an
The Prime
olive, or
Minister
locked in a
said it's not
disused fridge, or
impossible, Mr.
decapitated by a flying frisbee.
Notice how Donald has trouble with new words, plays with them a bit, but he's very good on American states. Well at home there.
Pernod Ricard, which is, this is really an example where we're repurposing alcohol. They went out and repurposed their alcohol production capabilities in Arkansas, Kentucky, Texas, and West Virginia to make hand sanitizer. That's a big difference. And they've been unbelievable. They really have. Pernod Ricard. Their first delivery will be on Tuesday. It's going to go to various states. They're going to start, I think, in New York, and they're going to work their way around. They're making a tremendous amount of hand sanitizer at a very high level, too, by the way.
But keep something in mind when it comes to leaders. They don't really lead. Even in dictatorships, the dictator passes on his order to, execute everybody who doesn't have a moustache. But often as not, it doesn't really get carried out, or it's his underlings that carry it out. And his chief underling has underlings of his own. It's kind of like democracy, but we go a step further. In a democracy, we don't let our top leader do anything at all. In a democracy, the top leader really has only one vital feature. That is the ability to get elected. They don't have anything else. I guess if I could get Donald Trump somehow to stop talking, I'd tell him this. Donald, don't say a word. Just stand and listen. You are so very lucky. You might have plagiarized your way to a bachelor's degree in economics at Wharton, but you were close to ruining that family business you inherited. Lucky you're not a drinker, or there'd be nothing to land that TV job that inflated your ego. Lucky that in TV land there are fawning producers whose job is to fluff you up, to make good TV, no matter what they really think. No, Donald, listen. Lucky that people are superstitious. We think it is good to be close to you and do favors for the rich, because that might make us rich. But it was others who made you too big to fail. You're lucky that we will somehow overlook your jumble of words that flow when you speak and surrender to our superstitions to allow you to keep in the White House for another 4 years, because, with luck, you'll look good after the virus moves on, mutating into something else. You'll never mutate on us, will you, Donald? You're luckily as mutated as you can get. Luck, too, that in November you'll look like the safe bet as you survived, despite not having a clue you'll get through again. Donald, finally, I've got to ask, don't you think that you've just had the luck of the moment, being in the right place at the right time, that others don't want to be in the firing line? Surely you don't really have much of an intelligence. Please agree, it's got to be all luck, hasn't it?
Tiny bit, maybe a little bit, but not much.
The other thing to keep in mind about our society is that they're not a real hierarchical series of people giving orders. They're really termite mounds, ant colonies, including all the faulty things that go with that, the termite mounds, dead ends, the ant colonies, gaping holes, the termites' faulty air conditioning. Yes, termites in their mounds do have air conditioning. It's extraordinary. Is it a collective mind? No, it's a series of little programs that seem to work together, ruthlessly paired into existence by endless deaths of colonies that just didn't work out. They don't know what they're doing. Now, human beings are slightly different. We do seem to know what we're doing. At least we tell each other that. Second thing to remember when it comes to considering the people who order us about is that The part of our brain that does the talking is a separate section. It's an autonomous kind of subroutine in the programming of it. A little department of talking. Some pretty interesting experiments have shown how this works, especially with that surgery that separates the two halves of the brain. It's done for people who suffer with epileptic fits. It was found, but by separating the two halves of their brain, those fits wouldn't take place. There seemed to be a clash of programming that caused them. Now, of course, the two halves could communicate, but interestingly enough, not in the section that did the talking. That seemed to be, I think it's on the right side, though I may be wrong there, but it's in a different department. And the experiment had somebody had this procedure, agreeing to obey commands written on strips of paper. Now, most of the strips of paper were harmless things, not actually commands, but they had agreed to do anything that came up. And so that only the right part of the brain would get the message, the left eye had a patch over it, so that it was only the non-talking part of the brain that could get the message as they flipped through the paper. One of the commands was, get up and leave the room. And the test subjects did exactly that. They stood and left. Now, when asked why they did that, the talking part of the brain said, oh, I just feel like stretching my legs, my back hurts, I need to go out and get a glass of water, or some excuse. But this was an excuse not delivered as a lie. It was though this was genuinely the truth. Now, after the eye patch was taken away and a kind of cross-communication between the two halves of the brain came back, the testers asked why it was they made up this ridiculous story instead of saying, well, you could have told me. I came to the piece of the paper that told me to leave the room, and now I'm leaving the room. And the people who'd had that operation said, part of me knew that, but not the part that was able to tell you about it. I couldn't tell you about it, but I wasn't feeling like I was lying. That part was on its own. So my point in all this is that the talking part of our brains is a separate division. People do it, but it might have nothing to do with our inner core. You can call it the primitive self, but it's not really primitive. But it certainly knows the talking part is somewhere else. Now, getting back to the judgment of officials and leaders. After my long stretch, I applied myself to looking at people's behavior rather than just what they said. It was kind of like turning the sound down on the television and just watching the movements. And this had some application in my smuggling work. In fact, arriving back in Australia once, which has notoriously tough customs, I tuned myself out and noticed something that the officers did. You would be assessed as you were about to walk through and directed to a desk. There were two officers. One would ask you to put your bag up on top of the desk and open it. Now, while one officer looked at you and chatted away about something, trying to get a feel about things, the other one opened the lid of the suitcase, dropped it onto his hand to feel the weight. That way he could tell if there was something a little too heavy in there. Then he would take one object at a time, the rolled up towel, the bag of toiletries, the bottle of duty-free wine, whatever it might be, and move it to the lid side of the bag. Give it a cursory check, because bear in mind they don't have time to take everything apart. They'd only do that with some other information. Now, this is a check where the two officers are going to decide if you're a wrong un or not. So as each object passes from one side of your suitcase to the other, it's the second officer who's just chatting to you, who's watching you. Now, when the first handler, we'll call him, lifts up the teddy bear, gives it a sniff and a look and feels its weight, yet puts it on the safe side, the lid side, meaning I've already checked this. The one who's watching your eyes, watching your body language, he notices something. As soon as Teddy got put to the safe side, your shoulders dropped from the tense position. You became more talkative. You had somehow a burden lifted from you. And it would be at that moment he would tap his comrade. Tap him to say that what you just passed over was it, the teddy bear. So here I was, learning the lessons of not listening to the words, but just observing things. And when it comes to our leaders, just observe them and you will realize that they're not actually doing anything. Collectively, things are happening, but more like termites than anything else. So as you wonder, as we are to some extent under threat from disease, though in fact what we're really doing by confining ourselves is freeing the hospitals to keep somebody else alive. If you wonder whether we're in safe hands with leaders, we're not really in their hands. We're in the collective hands of it's not a hive mind even, it's just a whole lot of little subroutines, the collective hands that are probably no more skilled than those people who might carry you across a mosh pit from one end to the others while stoned to the gills on ease. Yes, they're all rotten, but they got you to the other side of that pit. And if, as I once did, you wonder, amongst all those hands that are carrying you around, if there's some scheming arch-villain, force of darkness, agency creep that is going to do you harm, remember that they are fallible too. They are just as fumbling. In fact, in that sea of people wishing to do you well and a few wishing to do you harm, there's as much safety in mistakes as there is danger. It is very rare in this world when you get an enemy, a villain, who's absolutely sure of what he does. Though I once had ambitions in that direction myself. All in the past, of course. So enjoy the folly of our leaders, for it's not them.